Okie dokie. So we are fast approaching the Rails project mode, and this week we're talking about nested routes, right? So nested routes are going to be a way to deal with the kind of more complex domains that the projects are going to get into, right? So, if you think back to the Sinatra project, the domain was fairly straightforward, right? You had a user model, and then you had a user had many of one other thing, and you were doing your CRUD on that one other thing, right? The Rails project is going to ask you to go a little bit farther. You'll have user accounts, but then you'll have several models in your domain that'll have relationships between each other. And RESTful routes or nested routes are gonna give us a way to represent the relationships between our models through the routes in our website themselves, right? So I'm just gonna kind of dive in and talk about those routes as they come up. Okay. So I think last time we were doing books and authors, and today we'll do the same thing, right? So we'll do Rails new library, and we'll paste my favorite Rails new options in there. Fire it off, and we'll let that go. So if we head sure, I will send it to the main Slack channel, but I will at you. There you go. Cool. Okie dokie. So let's go ahead and open that file up. And let's see. We'll start. Hold on. Let me add some gems real quick. Bundle add. Let's see. We'll want pry. Groups. Development. Test. I always add an extra S there, but just group. That'll get my text editor up and running. Okay. And then we're in the library, and we will check out that gem file. It's gonna start. Yeah, awesome, cool. And then for testing stuff, we'll probably also want that faker gem. Okie dokie. So let's go ahead and okay. So we want to start off with our models, which will be basically the same as normal. So I'm going to go ahead and generate the author model. Authors will have a name. That name will be a string, so I don't have to type anything, but let me remember to put okay. Let me remember to type it out correctly. Generate a model, author, name, go. Cool. Then we'll want our book. We'll say that a book belongs to an author. So we'll generate model, book. A book has a title, and it's got an author, and it references that author. So we go ahead and do that. And then if we take a look, if we take a look at the book model that just got generated, you can see that we already belong to an author because I used the references type, so it knew to do that already. So let's run our db migrate, and that's good for that. So beyond that, we want to also start with some seed data, and this will we'll handle from the Faker website, or we'll handle from the Faker gem. So we'll check out gem Faker. On its GitHub page, you can see that it's got a bunch of different themes. In particular, it's got this books theme. We can kind of check out and see that it's got a title and it's got an author. So if we go ahead and set up our screen better, we can say we want, I don't know, 10 times do author equals author dot create name equals Faker book dot unique dot name Faker book book dot unique dot author, and then we'll say some rand number between 1 and 10 times do author dot books dot create title equals Faker book dot unique dot title. So if we did all that correctly, we should be able to run db seed. Oh, we have some kind of, because we haven't set up our relationships yet. So let's go into the authors table, and we'll say that an author has many books. Then we'll try to run db seed again. And it looks like that time that worked. Just to make sure, let's see if we can go into the console. And we should be able to say author.all. Load. Okay, so we'll pretty print author.all. And you can see we've got a whole bunch of authors in there. And then we should be able to say pretty print author.first.books. Let's see. So there's no books. Let's pretty print books.book.all. We do have some books in there. But why doesn't author have any particular books? So if we take another look at our books thing, we can see author ID. They all seem to have author IDs, except we don't have an author ID 1. That's interesting. Let's say A equals author dot first. We got that. This guy just doesn't have any authors, so let's say A dot destroy author dot first. So now if we pretty print author dot first dot books, he's got a bunch of books. Awesome. Cool. So our data is set up, and the kind of next thing to think about is the roots themselves. So let's head on over to our roots file. And this is where things are going to start being kind of new, right? Because at this point, you're used to saying, right, I want to do full CRUD. So let's say I want to do full CRUD on books. So I would type in something like that. Okay, and if I do that, then when I run rake roots, right, I can see that I have slash books slash new, right, all the kind of standard stuff. And because of my understanding of REST conventions, I can kind of understand what all these things do, right? I know that, let's change this from resource to resources. I know that when I get /books, I'm getting all of the books, right? That's a read action on all books. But when I get /book/ID, that's got an ID in there, so it's a read action on one specific book, right? And I know that posting is creating and patching is updating and all those kinds of nice conventions. Now, I want to also add some routes to deal with books and authors at the same time, but I don't want to just have a bunch of, like, if I were to just say resources authors on there and then run rate routes again, right? I get all these author routes, but there's no connection between the two, right? Someone just from the outside, they couldn't see what the relationship was. What I want to do is end up with a hierarchical relationship that shows that authors have many books, even from the outside, right? I want people to say that they can go to authors, right? They can find maybe one specific author with the ID 10, but then they can ask for that author's books, right? And you can see if they just add /books to the end, then they're getting all books for this specific author, right? And then maybe if they want to create a new book for that author, they can get a form at, this specific author's prefix, their books, and then their book's new form, right? So it's following the same kind of convention, but I want to put this prefix that shows that these books go with the authors. Now, the Rails syntax to do that, if you know that that's something you can do, it's pretty straightforward. All you got to do is add a block around the kind of the route that you want to come first, right? So we want /authors to be the first part, so we put that on the outside, and then we want authors to have many books, so we put the books on the inside of the author's do end block, right? And when we do that, what we're going to end up with, what we're going to end up with is all the author routes like we would normally see them, but then all of our books are only ever associated with authors, right? And that kind of makes sense, right? I want to say that it never makes sense to have a book without an author, so I don't want the user to even be able to go to the book new form without specifying a specific author ID, right? They have to already know that, or else they won't even be able to type the route, right? Because if they want to create a new book, right, they have to have something to put in the blank. So it's a way to kind of force the user to see this relationship, and it's a way to put the logic of your domain straight into the logic of how your app is being used. Okay, so let's say authors, right? I really only, at this point, I only want to be able to look at all authors. So let's check that out. All right, so now I can get all authors, but I don't have anything else. And then we'll do full CRUD on the books themselves, okay? So if I go ahead and generate a controller for authors, and then generate a controller for books, let's start at the authors controller. Okay, so authors, we only have the index, and that's going to be pretty straightforward. We just want to set an array of all the authors equal to author.all. And then in the authors view, we want to have an index.html.erb. We'll say these are our authors. We'll put this in an unordered list at authors dot each do f. Each do author, and then that is a squid when it should be an ice cream cone. So here, what we'll do, we'll have our list item. Our list item will contain a link to, and we want it to be a link to, we'll put author.name, and it's going to be a link to all the books for that author. So this is the route I want to go to, right? This first one. So I'm looking at the prefix for that particular book, right? Or the prefix for that particular root. And that's how I'm going to figure out my path helper, right? Author books, path. And then see how there's a parameter this needs. So we'll have to give it an author ID, which we can do by just passing author in there. Okay, so that is enough writing that we should probably test it out. Let's go ahead and say localhost, check out my authors. And if we go there, you see we've got these links, and these links, let's look at the page source. These links are all going to, right, author ID2/books, right? So when I click there, when I click on one of them, I should be able to see all of their books, okay? So now let's get to the exciting part, right? This books controller. So the books controller, right, it's going to be pretty similar to the kind of boilerplate that you're used to, right? Typically, the kind of rhythm that everyone's in now, right, is we go books.all, right? We want to set this at books variable equals book.all. That's the normal flow. But here, we don't want to show all the books. We want to somehow have some kind of, at author.books, right? We somehow need to set this author variable so that we have a specific author that we're looking at, and we only get their books, okay? Now, if we kind of compare this to what you would do if you were making the show root, right? The boilerplate for that is to say something like book equals book dot find by ID params ID, okay? So hopefully this line here is kind of familiar. But if we think for a minute about where that params ID comes from, it comes from this :ID thing in the root, right? If this had been books/:foo, then I would put books params foo in there, right? When I'm using this ID key, that key comes from this table. It comes from this part that's :ID bit of the table right there. So we can think that for the author, right, we can almost do exactly the same thing. But this time, we want to use this :author ID param. Right, so let's try that out. Okay. Let's put a by bug here. We'll put a by bug at the end, just to see what's going to happen. Okay, so here we are at the top. If we check out the params hash, right, you can see that in fact we do have an author ID, right? This author ID 3 comes from the fact that up here in my browser I'm going to /author/3. Okay. Now, if I go to the next line and check out author, you can see now that has gotten the specific author that I'm looking for. And that means that books is set to all the books for that specific author. Okay. But we still have a missing template, so let's go ahead and fix that. Okay. So we want to go to app views books index.html.erb. So here, I guess we'll start with the author's name. Right? If we refresh that, we can see that we've got his name. And then we can just do our usual list over the book array. Book each. Sorry? Oh, the li will come in when we're in the actual loop. And we'll just show Well, it should be, yeah. We'll link to, let's check out our, roots table again. So we want to forward to the show page. And so author book is the option there. So, okay, so we'll say book.title, author book path, and then let's see, there are two parameter arguments. So let's go ahead and just pass in 2 arguments. Well, can't exactly remember. Let's try. Wow. Okay, so if we do that. Author ID. So it wants an author ID first. Okay. And my guess is that we can also just pass in the author. Yep, that looks like it's doing the same thing. And then down here at the bottom, we can also just have a link to create new book. Okay, and that takes us to this author ID books 3/new thing. Okay, so let's kind of keep going with the flow here, right? So we want to have this new thing, right? And typically our flow would be to just set an empty object so that we can use it for the form for, right? Here we also have an author at play, right? So we're going to kind of want this same variable set. But notice we just copy and pasted a line, right? And whenever you copy and paste a line, it means it's probably a good time to set up a helper method, right? So let's kind of pause and take a moment to do that, right? We want to set up a private method that sets the author, okay? So this method should promise that author is set correctly, right? So what we'll do is we'll say something like unless, meaning if not, right? So if at author equals author dot find by ID params author ID, then redirect to I guess we'll redirect to author's path. Okay, so what we're gonna do, this thing will it'll set at author equal to the return value of find by ID. If find by ID fails to find an actual author, then it's gonna be nil, which means that this block will execute and will redirect to the author's path. What we want to do is execute that before any of our other actions go. So we'll use our before action set author. Right? So this means that this method will be executed before any of these are actually done. So we don't need that line anymore. We don't need that line anymore. But if we do a by bug, there we should still see that at author is set. It was set because that set author was already called. So if we continue, we can also see now that if you went to, I don't know, 300 or something like that, it redirects us back to this authors list, right? Because it knew that author wasn't found. Okay. So we've got the author, right? And what we want to do is say that this book needs to be associated with that specific author. So the has many macro gives us access to this author.books thing, right? Which returns something that pretends to be an array. But it's also got a bunch of other methods on it, and the kind of has many version of new, right, is build, right? So when I call author.books.build, it's the same thing as creating a new book, not saving it, but going ahead and automatically setting its author ID. So if I set a bybug there, go ahead and refresh, right? What you should be able to see is that at book, right, it doesn't have any of the fields set except for the author ID. Whereas if I were to just say book.new, that author ID would be nil. Okay. So app views books new.html.erb. So here we are. We want to create a new book. Good. We're going to do that with our normal form for thing. That'll take in our book. Gotta remember to do f. And then we'll need a f.submit button. Oh. Form for book to undefined method books path. Oh, that's interesting. Let's check my bybug there one more time. Book. Undefined method books for class. Interesting. So, okay. Let's double check something real quick. Rails form for. Go to our documentation. Check out form for with a model object. See if it says anything about. Still okay. Super post path. Okay. So what is it looking for? It's looking for book path. Okay. Okay, so what I was just reading there, right, is that there's a lot going on behind the scenes when we generate a form, right? One of those things is this action. So by default, it looks like form 4 is just assuming that there's a standard path helper, right? Just a books path helper, but we don't have one of those, right? So we just had to manually specify which path helper to do. So that URL chunk is what's giving us this action here. That's what's going on. Cool. So a book just needs a title. So we've got that, and then it should take in, well, yeah, that's all it really needs because it's already got the author attached to it. Cool. So whenever we have a form like that, we're going to also need a book params method, right, to handle our strong params. The form for means that we start with require book because it's going to nest everything under the book tag or the book key. And then we need to permit all of the inputs that we have. So we'll permit a title to go through. This will bring us to the def create method. The def create method will just say at book is going to be equal to author.books.build. Author.books.build, book params. Then we want to say if we can save the book, then go ahead and redirect to author book URL at author at book. Else we'll go ahead and render the new form again. Okay. So in order for that to work, we should have a show page real quick. So we'll say .show.html.erb. Okay. Cool. So we submitted that, and it took us to the show page. And if we check our server output, we should be able to see that a new book was added. Yeah, here we go. So we inserted a new book with that title that we just gave it and the author ID. So now, if we go back to that author's page, we should see this new title there. Let's make that process a little bit easier. So we'll say this is the show page for book at book.title. By book.author.name. But really that should be a link to path. Oh yeah, we don't have a show page for an author. So we'll redirect to author books path. Yeah, we specified that in the roots. We said only index. And really we just had that to have an entry point. Okay, cool. So let's link to edit book, edit author book. Yes, we did mean edit author book path. Okay. So there, we can click on that. This should bring us to an edit page. Cool. And the edit page, right, we want to go back to the books controller. Edit is pretty similar to new, right? So edit, the first thing we're going to need to do is set this this book variable, but anytime we're copying and pasting, right, we want to create a helper method. So let's go ahead and say set book, and we'll say unless we'll say unless at book equals book dot find by ID params ID redirect to author books. And then up here we'll say this before action should run set book, and then we'll say it should only run before the actual actions that need it. So that's the show page, the edit page, the update action, and the destroy action, right? So let's make sure that that is set correctly. Yep. Cool. And then we're going to want to share a bunch of code between this and the new form, right? So this form 4 is something we should be able to share between us, between these things. So what we're going to do is create a partial by making a view with an underscore in front of it. So we'll say underscore form.html.erb. We'll take this stuff and we'll cut it, paste it up there. All of these instance variables, we'll go ahead and replace them with local variables. And then here, we'll just render the form. Locals will be set, book will be set to @book, and author will be set to @author. So we just changed our new form, so let's test that out again. Create a new book. Oh. Partial. Okay. So we've got that there. Everything's working fine. Let's go back to our edit. We should be able to really just reuse that line. So if we want to go here, we've got new book title. We can come here, and that's already filled in. So we could say we want this to be new book title with capital letters, but that's not going anywhere because we don't have a patch. So let's go back to our books controller. Def update. Now the update is pretty similar. Update is pretty similar to this this part of the new, right? In that it book should already be set by our perform before action. We're going to update it with book params. And if that passes, then we'll redirect to its show page. Otherwise, we'll render edit. Choo-choo-choo. You know what's not working in our doom in our form. We manually set the URL, right? But that URL isn't the same URL that we want, right? Because we're patching to authors 3 books instead of authors 3 books book ID. So let's go ahead and also specify a URL. So if we look at the page source, the form action is now going to books book ID. So if we update the book, it looks like it's working. We can do a different title, and we get a different title. So let's go ahead and handle our destroy. Destroy, the before action is already setting the @book model, so we should be able to say @book.destroy, and then we'll just redirect to author books for @author. Doom. Author book path book.author @book. Okay, so there's a delete button, but it's not the right delete button. I always forget link to delete, how this works in Rails. Oh, but interesting. Let's see if it works. So if we delete the book, nothing happens. Let's check our server. It's issuing a GET request. Yeah, okay. So what's going on here, this method, method delete thing, you'll notice it set this data method there. What's going on is that involves some JavaScript to make it work, and when I ran my Rails new command, notice I turned off all the JavaScript. So here, to get delete to work, we'll have to break REST convention a little bit. We'll have to break REST convention here by going back to our roots file. We'll have to support it with a GET request. So we'll say GET /authors/author ID /books/ID/delete. That should map to books destroy. So now do we have, yeah, we've got this get destroy method. And then we should have a path helper as author book delete. Yeah. So now if we refresh that, it's going to the right place. Now if we delete the book, now it's gone. So that was just it deviates from the REST convention, but it does it by it's what we have to do in order to avoid using any JavaScript there. But the big takeaway, the big kind of thing from this particular lesson, right, is that you wanna be able to think in terms of these nested roots, right? You want to show your relationships between your models from the outside. When you do that in your controller, you want to make sure that you're somehow reading both properties from the path parameter, right? Not just one, that you notice that there's an author ID and an ID. And then you can always make use of this before action to kind of really dry that stuff up. Cool. Okay. So I think this is fairly complete. Yeah, cool. Okay, let me kind of pause there now that we've gone through that stuff. How's everybody feeling about this particular thing? Is there anything in the chat? Oh, okay. Feeling good? Umberto's the only one with the camera on, and I saw a thumbs up from him. Cool. Rock and roll. So I guess let's try something interesting here. Let's say you also wanted to be able to just create a book, right? So we've got these nested roots, but you also want some unnested roots, right? So we'll say you can only create a new book without specifying an author, right? We'll do it that way. So if we do that, if we just add that one thing, right, you can see now we've got one non-nested books root. But notice it's still mapping to the same controller action, right? It's still the same controller action as this one here, right? But now suddenly it's not, that one particular root doesn't require an author ID. So if we want to refactor that particular action, we're going to have a problem right away, right? Our problem is that the set author is going to run before it, and set author is going to redirect if there's no author ID. So let's see if we can say before action except new, right? Don't run before new. So now if I'm here at this author's page, if I just create new, notice undefined method books for author class, because that's now a nil class. So what we want to do, I think, is we'll just create a new book like we normally would, right? And then we'll say at book. Right, so we'll create a new book like we normally would, and then we want an author instance maybe, right? So I think what we'll say is author equals author.findById params author ID. let's say, well, yeah, author find by ID, params ID. So then we'll say author or equals author.new. So we're saying try to get an author, but if you can't, just make it a new author. Okay, so now we're coming here and undefined local variable author. Cool. We've got that going on. But if we take a look at our page source, right? Author is just a new author. Well, okay, so that works there. But if I just go to /book/new, yeah, see, then that's missing. Okay. So what we'll have to do is say something like, right, we're just saying that this is kind of more complex logic than we want to do in a view. So we're just going to decide to make it a variable. So let's say if, well, yeah, if that author is there, then path is equal to author books path author. Else author equals some blank new author, and path equals new book path. So we do that, and so this particular page source still has the right action, but this page source has just the standard action. Oh, okay. So, okay. So then, if we go to our form, we should be able to then add a fields for author : author do ff and name. Text fields. So we've got author name. We'll go ahead and end that paragraph. Cool. So we get author name when we just go there, but I guess if we go to /authors/3/book/new, then the name is automatically filled in. Okay. So from there, well, we can view the page source. Cool. So from there, yeah. We're gonna need another root real quick. because we'll also need the create action. This gives us the ability to post to books. So really, so here we want to also say except for create. So here, we should be able to just say add book dot new book params, but then we'll do our author attributes. Name and ID. Cool. So then we'd have to go in and set the author attribute setter in the controller, and that would be that. And you can have this kind of create a new author at the same time as you create a book. Okay. Let me turn off the recording real quick because I've got a pod meeting to bounce to. But this was fun.